Hello, this is Teresa Kimball, and you've arrived at the place where I discuss how to stay married for a lifetime. I've been married 51 years, and how to cope with mental illness. I am bipolar, and how to have a relationship with God, which is most important, which is how we learn to cope with both of those topics. Yesterday, or the last message that I gave you, I spoke extensively about the birth of my two children and did not talk as much about the hysterectomy and the bladder repair that came 5 months after Laura was born. I do want to say this and remind you that a doctor made a mistake, a nurse made a mistake, and then I had surgery on October 15th of 1984. I went into surgery at 8 o'clock. I came out at 12. I hemorrhaged for 2 hours and had to go back to surgery to find out where I was hemorrhaging from. And the doctor found out I was hemorrhaging from behind the bladder, and he had to take out every stitch that he had put in. So I had to go back for a second surgery, which lasted from 2 to 6 o'clock. So that day I was in surgery 8 hours. I never resumed consciousness between the two surgeries. And my mother was with me that whole time, and she said probably I had lifted myself up off the bed and stretched so much because I was in pain that I caused one of the sutures to come undone. I don't know how many. But I was on morphine every 90 minutes. That's how much pain I was in. It did not touch the pain. And finally, they found that Tylox would. And so I was on 10 Tylox pills a day, which now that I'm 71 years old, I realize is a huge dose. I was sent home with 50 Tylox, and I took them in 5 days. What I was doing was masking a bladder infection, so I had pain upon pain upon pain. I came home. I was in the hospital 10 days, and I came home on October the 25th, and I stayed in my bedroom for 6 weeks. As I said in the last message, my husband's parents took care of the kids for 6 weeks. And so what happened next, since I know about depression and looking back, having had the experience that I did over this so many years, I went into a very deep, dark depression. I said in the last message about how angry I was. I was angry at my surgeon for having to do the second surgery. I was angry at my mother-in-law for having the kids so well behaved because I felt inferior. I was angry at my husband for having me want me to work and stay at home. And I had all of these planned for myself, and I was not in control anymore. So I was angry, and the depression, one of the definitions of depression that I latched onto when I found it was depression is frozen rage. So if you are depressed, that is rage held inward, called depression, and then when that rage thaws or lets go, then it becomes anger. Anger and depression are flip sides of the same coin. Now, incorporate that with, I was depressed when I was a child. I had a chemical imbalance, and I believe that it was started way as a child. I would sit at the dinner table and I would start crying, and my mother would say, "Teresa, what's wrong?" And I would say, "Mama, I do not know." And I didn't know. So I had that. I had a chemical imbalance depression. I had a situational depression, which came about because of the babies and so forth and the surgery. And I also, I had situational, I had the current problem that I had, and then I had postpartum depression after Laura was born. Here I am 5 months after being able to have a baby, and then not being able to have a baby, and those hormones were conflicting. And so I went through a major upheaval in the conversion of all three of those types of depression. So what did I do? In the beginning, I didn't know what was wrong. When back in the 50s and 60s, when I was growing up, and 70s and so forth, people just ended up in the Our Lady of Peace, and they had a nervous breakdown. But nobody in that time talked about depression. They did not know what it was, so it was kind of kept silent. And so I went to a general practitioner and I told him how I felt. And he said, Teresa, you have just described depression to me better than any patient I've ever had. So he diagnosed me with depression at that time, and he gave me Prozac. And that was at the time that there was a lawsuit, and there was a person on Prozac that I think had shot her doctor or had done something to her doctor. So it was because of anger. And sure enough, when I went from 10 to 20, I got angry. I got angrier, and I said, this is not right. I don't need to be doing this. So in 1994, 10 years after the birth of my daughter, I started going to a psychiatrist. And I saw him from 1994 to 2005, and he put me on Paxil, which was completely for depression at that time. So I loved it. I got better. I didn't realize that the highs, that I was not supposed to be high and low, and I was not diagnosed with bipolar until I was 52. And so here is where I am 39, and I'm not diagnosed with bipolar, which is correct, until 52. So after he moved, and then after that, I saw 2 more psychiatrists in 2005 and 2006. And then I started going with my current psychiatrist, believe it or not. And here it is, 2026. But I started seeing him in February of 2007. He diagnosed me as bipolar, and I've been on Lamictal ever since that day. You can see there's a ton of medications that I've been put on. I've been put on Zoloft, Prozac, Lexapro, Paxil, Seroquel, Trazodone, Depakote, and Buspar. So when you are depressed and you don't know what's wrong and you don't know where to go, it is just trial and error until you get the drug that you respond to correctly. It's just trial and error. But you have to go through all of those different drugs, because it is they're mind-altering drugs, and it takes a while for the mind to get into it. And it's typically, they say, I think it's about 6 weeks or whatever until you know. And I knew the next day. I knew the next day if the drug was right or not. And if it wasn't, I knew it immediately. What was my body doing when I had depression? My body had been through so much, as I have described in these last 2 videos, that it said, nope, I'm done. I am shutting down, and you're not going to hear from me for a while because you have put me through so much stuff, so much hardship, and I've had to deal with this, and my mind is shot and my body is shot, so I'm checking out. Sayonara. Enough. So in 1994, 10 years after the surgery that I had, Dr. Kinnaman, my first psychiatrist, did some kind of chemical testing of the brain. I don't know what it is, but he showed that I had one of the most active hypothalamuses he had ever seen in his life. So that was a piece of the puzzle that kind of was a good start for me healing on the road of depression. And you don't heal from bipolar, but you do learn to live with it. But that was in 1994, and I had been wandering in the wilderness for 10 years. I had really been wandering in the wilderness for 10 years. And when I say that I had a depression that put me in the pit, God put me in the pit like he did, like Joseph was put in the pit. I did not know how to coin that biblically until I went to a seminar. I went to a ladies' day in Alabama, and Doris Black, who is my mentor, she died of Alzheimer's. She was wonderful. I went to a couple of places to hear her. She was the only member of the church that I knew that spoke nationwide. So I read her book, I listened to her, I got her tapes. And so she was there in Alabama speaking that weekend. And I told her all about my history and the stuff that I was going through. I was grasping at straws. And all she said was, yes, Teresa, We all have to have our wandering in the wilderness. The penny dropped. And I could succinctly know from then on what God was doing with me. And what I was going through was my wandering in the wilderness. And oh, was I wandering in the wilderness. I'm so glad that she told me that in just that weekend. That's why I went to the Ladies' Day. I know it is beyond a shadow of a doubt. Why have I kept all of these dates, all of these doctors' names, the medicines I was put on, the surgeries I've had, the recoveries, all of that? Why was I put on that? Is because when I was 29, God knew that I would have so many lessons that He has taught me that I would be bubbling over to give them away. That is how, and I want to end every message with this. That is why Daniel Henderson, who I just was introduced to this week, says, the worst of times are often the best of times. They just don't feel like it at the time. I really beg you, if you are in the throes of depression or you are wandering and you have an impossible problem that you are trying to deal with, I beg you that God does not demand perfection. And we're going to talk about perfection probably with depression in the next message. God does not expect perfection. He expects faithfulness. And I have had people tell me, I heard this from Max Lucado when he said that there are some people who have a ministry of suffering. When I heard that, I thought, yes, God, if I have a ministry of suffering that can show people faithfulness during all of the years of suffering, He demands that we are faithful, not perfect. And also, He also does not require able bodies to serve Him. In the next message, I will be talking about the nuts and bolts of depression, what it feels like, what the family, how the family reacts to it, and how I reacted. And I promise to get into it very clearly. So if you don't understand it or you have to deal with a member of your family that has it, maybe you will know what to do. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this video. I hope that you've been encouraged. And if you know someone that suffers from depression or they're in the middle of a terrible thing, I pray that the Father will lead you to them and that you can share this video and tell them about this channel on YouTube. God bless you. I'll see you next time.